Right. Sorry for the delay, everybody, and for the IT problems. Thank you for joining us this evening. For anyone who hasn't been before, my name is Kim, and I'm the childminding partner for the Barn Stronger Practice Hub. And with us this evening, we also have Lisa from the Barn as well, and Damon, who's going to be our IT person this evening. And tonight, we're going to be talking about in the moment planning. Now, you will have, if you've been to any of these webinars before, you know it's mostly me just sort of talking at you. And then we have a little bit of a discussion at the end. But today I have invited along a special guest who is the fantastic, outstanding childminder, Kate Cooling Smith. Hooray!
Hi.
Who's so Kate and I both use in the moment planning, and the barn use it too. And we thought it would be helpful for you if we just have a general chat about in the moment planning and how we use it actually in our settings. So here's our little agenda for tonight, which is introduction. What do we mean by in the moment planning? And Kate and I are going to have a chat, and then we're going to have questions and comments at the end. As always, I'll leave space for that, but feel free if you've got something you want to comment on or chip into about anything, either unmute yourself and say something, pop your camera on and join us, which would be fantastic, or just pop something in the chat. And then if I don't see it, Damon will spot it and let me know. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with in the moment planning, I've got this lovely quote from Anna F. Grave, which I think that's how you say her name, uh, which is planning in the moment is nothing new. It's exactly what a responsive parent does every day. It's exactly what skillful practitioners have always done. Every time an adult looks at, listens to a child, they are assessing, planning, and how to respond. So you're sort of looking at a child, you're working with them in the moment. Okay. I've got another nice quote here as well from Magda Gerber, who's also advocate of in the moment planning, which is be careful what you teach them. It might interfere with what they are learning. So anyone who's been to any of the other webinars will know that we're talking a lot about child-led learning and open-ended critical thinking, open-ended resources, that type of thing, because evidence shows that children learn best when they learn lead their own learning. Right. I'll leave that there because it's all been a bit weird and I don't want to sort of um, cause any more problems. I'll stop sharing. And then let's introduce Kate. Are you there, Kate?
I am right here.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So I've got a few questions to ask you, Kate, but it's just a bit of a it's just so we've got a bit of a structure to the
Yeah.
session, really. So you've been childminding for a while now, but can you tell me what led you to in the moment planning? Did you do it right from the start? Did you come to it gradually? How did you arrive at that way of working?
Okay. So I've been childminding for almost 10 years now. Um, I didn't come from any background in childcare, child development. It's something I fell into accidentally. Um, it was the way I practice now is completely different to how I started out. Um, I think, and you'll be kind of aware of this, Kim. I started following the curiosity approach, and I was quite interested in the way they were kind of like a looser based kind of provision. And I think naturally that just fitted with kind of how I felt learning should be. And it's something that developed naturally over 9 years, to the point that now I am completely in the moment. Um, and I also use a slow pedagogy, which goes hand in hand with that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Those two things do go really hand in hand. At the end, that reminds me, at the end, I've put some links to these two amazing books. One which is Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child, which is all about slow pedagogy, and Planning in the Moment, which is the sort of Bible for planning in the moment planning. But actually, um, although childminders can obviously use this, I feel like it's a little bit aimed towards slightly larger groups. Do you have that book, Kate? Is that something you use?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah. Because I know one of the things that she suggests is things like having a focused child, but I never found I really needed that because I'm working with such a small group. I don't know about you. Shall we just go through what we actually mean by in the moment planning and slow pedagogy? What
Mhm.
what does that mean to you and to me and to Lisa as well? Chip in if you want to, Lisa.
Okay.
Like I said,
So
so for, oh,
yeah, go on.
no, I was going to say for me, it is literally about knowing your children, noticing your children, not having any preconceived ideas about what you expect them to learn, expect them to do. And it's about responding to them in that moment and bringing in your kind of holistic approach in that moment.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that's it in a nutshell, really, for me.
I agree. I think that quote from Anna at Brave really sort of sums it up as well, that we're doing that all the time without knowing it. And I think sometimes people are writing out these sort of written plans as a sort of a safety net for themselves. But actually, I see network sessions and when I talk to other childminders and see how they work, they're doing in the moment planning. They just might not call it that. They might not be aware that they're doing it, but it's not incredibly difficult, is it? It's actually
Right.
quite easy to be there in the moment. Um, One of the things people have said to me before is, look, as a childminder, if you've got like a group of children, I don't, you need to go and change someone's nappies, something like that, or the phone rings or something like that, and so you're not with them in the moment. But I think you can only be you one person. You've got to give yourself a bit of a break
Yeah.
and just be present when you can be. But I think a lot of it is to do with having this sort of enabling environment, isn't it? And having the
Sure.
environment as a third teacher.
Fair teacher, yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
It does a lot of the work for you, doesn't it? If you've got an environment where the children can access resources by themselves and move resources around um, and come to decisions themselves about what to use and how to use them, that means you haven't got to be the one that's providing all those and having to do it there and then.
No, and I think environment is really key to that. It is, if you don't have an environment that does that, then you're going to find it really difficult to plan in the moment.
Mm,
For me, the way that I set everything out, the resources that I've chosen, um, that is that forms the basis of everything for me. And then I'm basically the extra bit that pops in and out when I'm needed. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, you're the extra person. You're the one
Yeah.
that something needs scaffolding. Someone needs support with something they're trying to do. They just literally need a spare pair of hands. Can you hold that while I join this together? Or
Yeah.
they, all that type of thing. It's very easy, and people are doing that all the time, but they don't necessarily realise that's what in the moment planning is. And slow pedagogy. How would you sort of describe that?
Okay. So for me as well, the slow pedagogy is something I didn't realize I was doing. I didn't realize it had a name. It's something that naturally I just felt fit for me. And then I came across Alison Clark's Unhurried
Mm,
Child, and realized it did have a name. But it basically looks like stripping back your days, giving children time and space to just be in the moment, to make sure that you're facilitating that so that you're not breaking off play, you're not rushing onto something else, you haven't got a big schedule of things to do in your day.
mm.
Once we give children that time and space to just be, that's when the really like enriching learning happens.
Yeah,
Um, so for me, it's just about making sure that I don't have preconceived ideas about what we're going to do, what we're going to learn. I have a rough idea how the week might go, but
mm.
everything is pared right back so that the children literally are in control, and I'm just following them along and seeing kind of where they go and what they're doing, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's very similar to how I do things. So I just we were talking earlier, weren't we? I was saying there's a difference between planning roughly how your week might go because you might have to book ahead for a group or something that you're doing. That's something different. But I think as childminders, we've got this amazing opportunity to allow children to have time to spend
Yeah,
the whole day.
sure.
So last Friday, I said to the children when they arrived, "What would you like to do today?" And it was the first sort of really nice sunny day, wasn't it, of the year? And they just wanted to be in the garden all day long. And so we were in the garden all day long. We had lunch in the garden. We were in the garden all day long, and they went from one thing to another. They were making ice creams in the sand pit, and then they were mixing water in with something else, and then they were in the mud kitchen, and the play evolved the whole day with no adult saying, "You've got to stop now because we've got to read stories," or
It's really worth noting that that's enough as well. Like some
yeah,
people might feel like, well, you've not, what else have you done? But that's the beauty of a slow pedagogy. That is enough. And I'm sure that you
yeah,
covered all 7 areas of learning. I'm sure all of those children learned something that day. You met
yeah,
all their next steps.
yeah.
And it
I totally agree. I think you can. One of the things I've said to people before, if you're not sure about in the moment learning, is sit back and just watch the children doing something. Let's say, for instance, in the garden, in the mud kitchen, or something like that, and write down the areas of learning that you can see being covered. And you could virtually fill up. You could, if you were ticking off a tracker, which we don't really do anymore, you could tick off everything because they'd be communicating, they'd be negotiating, there'd be critical thinking going on, there'd be maths with filling, emptying things, or counting out how many cakes, or charging for ice creams. Ice creams are very expensive in our garden. I just
same with us. £40 an ice
yeah,
cream.
yeah, yeah, really, really expensive. And they don't really taste very nice either.
Oh,
So yeah, thank you. That's really, I think it's good to just sort of explain the what we actually mean by it, because I think the terminology, or when we use an acronym like ITMP, it's not always obvious to people what we mean, is it?
Can
So
I just chip in, Kim, with something?
yeah, yeah, of course you can.
I think you phrased something really nicely just then, because we're talking about it being like in the moment planning, and I think the word planning is the thing
Mm,
that scares everyone. That word planning, it almost means that it involves paper and writing and all of that. But you just changed the wording very slightly, probably not knowing that you did it, and said in the moment learning. And I think if you move away from that word planning and take on board that in the moment learning, I think it makes it sound far more simpler,
yeah.
and less scary. And I think that's where people get het up on it, because we have the word planning in there.
That's a really good point, Lisa. Yeah. Yvonne, I wonder if it's possible for you to mute yourself, please, because there's got a lot of echo going on. Thank you. Um, I I totally agree. Would you agree with that, Kate? I think it's
Yeah,
that
for sure.
can be quite a scary thing, and I think from when I talk to childminders, a lot of childminders, as they are holding on to paper planning, or planning in some sort of hard form, as a bit of a safety net, and actually if you can take a step away from that and just look at the learning that's going ahead. One of the links I've put at the end there is to a blog, and it's on. She's a childcare person in Canada. And it's called "Listen to the Children," and her
I love
video,
that. Yeah,
children, yeah, they're just amazing, aren't they? It's
yeah.
just, and it's completely child led, with her just sort of pottering around in the background where she's needed, as Kate was saying. It's really there. If you want to see examples of actual in the moment planning, in the moment learning, maybe then. Oh no, that's okay, Yvonne. Don't worry about it at all. That's all right. The internet's a bit weird tonight. Um, if you want to see real examples of that, not in a child minding setting, but a very small setting, definitely have a look at those. Listen to the children.
She's on Facebook if people want to follow her.
Yeah, I follow her
Yeah.
on Facebook, and she's on all the platforms, isn't she? So let's have a think then, for all of us. What does in the moment, let's call it in the moment learning instead. What does in the moment learning practically look like in our settings? What do we see, and what do we do? I think we've sort of covered it a little bit already. Are we? You do that at the barn, don't you?
Yes, we do. And I will say it's something that we didn't used to do. When
Mm,
we very first opened, like Katie, 10 years ago, we had planning, because that's what you did. And you came out of school and everything was planned, and you've done. So we've kind of brought that into the barn. And then, very quickly we moved away from that, to
mm,
in the moment planning, whereby I think it was still a lot of, although it was in the moment, there was still a lot of adult interaction and leading, to the point where now we just moved away from all of it.
mm,
And it is that in the moment learning. And I think looking at each, you've got to remember, our curriculum is the child, that's it. We don't have these these hefty curriculums that some people decide to write. We have an intention to our curriculum, and as long as that's being reflected in what we're doing during the day, we don't need reams and reams of paper to show that. We used to have paper to show how we extended learning, where we brought in British values, where where it was focused on our action plan for the barn. It's all gone. That unique child, it's all centered around them. And like you say, we've got, we're looking at 50 children, you're looking at 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
4, 5, 6 children, and so therefore, things will look like slightly different, but still going with that unique child and that unique child interest. So how can you call it planning when you're not going to know what that is going to be that day? You don't know what they did the night before that they're going to bring in to nursery that day that then kind of builds on. I think the best one, the one that I always use it was really early on in the days of when we did in the moment planning, was one of our children had gone to an ice hockey match, and they'd come in the next day and they wanted to play ice hockey. So they made this ice hockey pitch in the garden. There was people cheering, and we all joined in and we were cheering, and some children didn't understand what ice hockey was. So we came inside and looked on the interactive whiteboard at what ice hockey was. And then somebody noticed flags, and they're asking what these are. So we looked at flags and we started talking about different countries. And it happened to be also be an Olympic ice hockey match. And so they're saying, well, what are all these? And we started talking about the Olympics, and we went further in. And before we knew it, we were at the opening ceremony of the Rio Olympic Games. And then we went on and we had the maps out, and we were looking at where all these countries were and what animals lived in these countries, all from an ice hockey match. And that is in the moment planning. It's just where it takes you in that moment. And
being led with the child's interest.
Absolutely.
That is,
when it comes to the adjustment, the codes, when they check the codes, it's invalid. So we're trying to avoid scenarios. That's why the clear plan is one of the options. We are giving you that opportunity to check.
Sorry.
Lisa, going with what you've just been saying, I bet that day those children learned far more and were far more engaged than anything you could have planned, like pre-planned.
And those children that didn't go to the ice hockey match still had an amazing amount of learning that went on. Yeah. The child that went to the ice hockey match also learned all of that other stuff as well. It's been
such a good example.
And that's the one thing that I could say that came off of it. If you looked at the areas of learning that came out of that, it was just incredible. And it's the one of the highlights, I would say, of something that's always stuck with me, that shows that how quickly something can evolve into something else and can evolve into something else, and you can just keep building on things, and you can just keep going. There's no end.
Yeah, the end is when the child has finished with it, isn't it? Yeah. Helen's just put an example on the chat, which is that one of her children was pretending to eat her like a penguin, eat her with a penguin. I asked him, does he know what penguins eat, rather than me? And he said no. So they went to have a look, and they went and watched a blog from a zoo about feeding penguins. And they ended up talking about small and medium and large fish, and watching the fish swim around as well. Yes, that type of thing is just like, that was in the moment. That child had that sudden interest. Something was interesting to them. You went with it, Helen, and you it evolved. And sometimes it can be such a simple thing, can't it? It can be, you see a child doing something, and you just think, if I just put that other resource nearby, that might be something that they use as well. I don't know, say they're trying to use tongs, or they're using tongs to fix something up, and you've got different types of tongs, for example, and you put those nearby, and then they're having to use different muscle movement, but they don't even know you're doing that for them sometimes, do they? Or I remember for us, one of the days that, this was quite a long time ago now, even the older school children always refer back to this, and it was the summer, and we were coming back from school through the park, and we'd had really heavy rainstorm early in the morning, and the sandpit was filled up with warm water, and they just went for a swim basically in the warm water. And they always said, one of them said that that's the best day ever as we were there. And they remember that afterwards, that they were swimming in the sandpit. And it's that, you can't plan for those things. Like you couldn't plan for the Olympics. And actually, if you had planned for the Olympics, it would be a little bit, no offense to you, Lisa, but be a bit of a naff adult-led thing, wouldn't it? We're all going to celebrate the Olympics today. That episode of Peppa Pig where they have to be the countries of the world, it wouldn't
it's meaningful, isn't it? It makes it meaningful learning. And I think, Kim, you were talking about it, the simpleness of things. And I think when we pre-plan, we look for the complexity and we want it to be a complex activity. But actually, if we look for the simplicity and we plan the simplest of things and let the children lead that, the complex learning comes directly from them. They will learn in a more advanced way than we could have planned for because they are leading it, they are interested, they're engaged.
Yeah.
We overthink, kind of like, oh, we need to be learning this today, or this is where I want to get to at the end, and you might not reach it because you pre-planned it and it didn't go as you expected. But if you pull it back, if you strip it back, and that's that slow pedagogy again, if you strip it right back to something simple, those kids will always take it somewhere complex. And it's trusting that, I think, that's really important.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
I totally agree with everything everybody's saying, and it's like you said, I think we're doing it naturally. But my concern is I have quite a younger setting, so these interests and these conversations I don't get a lot. Some of mine are non-verbal, and I'm not getting as much kind of, oh, we did this, or I've got an interest in this, or what does that mean? So can you give examples of trying to do in the moment planning with younger, like 2 and below, of how if they're not coming to us with their ideas, or they're coming into the setting and they're looking at us kind of, looking around what we're going to do today. Obviously we have things set out for them, but it's very hard to pull out complete interest when they're not communicating that, if that makes sense.
But let's have a think of an example. I totally get what you mean, Charlotte, but it doesn't have to be like some of these examples where they're saying we went on holiday, or we went to a certain place, or we went to the ice rink. Imagine you've got a young child, a non-verbal, very young child, and they're out in the garden and they pick a daisy, and they sit down and they look at that daisy, and you sit down with them and look at that daisy, and then they see a ladybird, and you start just talking to them about the ladybird, and then they take the daisy and they go and mix it up in some water and give it to you and pretend it's a cup of tea, and you're talking about how the cup is full up, or it's a lovely cup of tea, or it's very hot. That's in the moment planning. All you do is you let the child do what they feel they want to do. Because children will play naturally. They don't really need an adult to lead their play, because that comes naturally to them. They will explore interesting and curious things, won't they? And then, you're out in the park, you're climbing on trees, whatever it is you're doing, you're supporting their learning, aren't you? So say if you went out somewhere and there were some logs on the floor, and you had a child that wanted to climb over the logs, they couldn't quite manage it, so you helped them. You put your hand out to support them, to allow them to balance over the log. That's in the moment planning or learning. Or saying to them, you can do it, put your foot on this bit, or hold on to that part. That's in the moment learning. It's as simple as that. It's not anything complex. It's something you do every day without even thinking about it.
Can I just chip in as well a second?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, hi Lottie, you're right. It's also comes back to that environment as their teacher again. So I had a family come to settle today, and they brought, so their baby's joining me, but their 2-year-old came too. And it's about, I think schematic play comes into a lot for those younger children. He went straight to my kind of heuristic loose parts kind of section of the room. And I noticed that he had a real interest in ping pong balls, and he was determined that he was going to use these in some way. I noticed that he was throwing them, he was kicking them, so that trajectory schema was there. So in that moment, I pulled out, we've got like ramps, laminate flooring that we've turned into ramps. We pulled that out, and he was rolling them down there, and we were using the language around it. And his language isn't great. He's got some gaps there, but it was just modelling that language around him. And then we we found like a basket that we added to the bottom to see whether he could get the ball into the basket. And, it was pulling in that maths language as well. So we were counting, it was all very relaxed and very loose. But in that moment, he was super engaged because, all he wanted to do was roll those balls down. But it was popping in those extra bits around it. And it's looking at that simplicity again. So it doesn't matter the age of the child, whether they're babies, whether they're toddlers, preschoolers. It doesn't have to be complex to be in the moment. I think we need to be kind of more confident that these smaller kind of things that they're doing are important, and that is, what they need to be doing in that moment.
I think also, if you think about babies and stuff like that, as long as your provision is differentiated enough that it's accessible to all of the children. So like treasure baskets are wonderful resources for babies. If you put everything in a treasure basket that was silver, or everything in a treasure basket that's like wooden or brushes or those kind of things, and you've got a mixture, they'll begin to make those connections that these things look the same, they might feel the same, they're the same colour. That's all learning in the moment for babies. You don't need to tell them anything. They'll make those connections and build on those connections themselves. And it's about making sure that the resources and your provision's right. So if your children are coming in to your room and they're looking around and they don't know what to do and you've got to show them, then what I would do personally is have a re-look at your provision, think about children's interests, add in loads of, like Kim said, curious objects, loose parts that are open-ended, that don't necessarily have a purpose, but the children can be creative with that, and then you'll see that learning develop in the moment as they begin to create and be imaginative and things like that.
There's also a question on here. Sorry, thank you, Lisa and Kate. There's a question on here about resources and what the resources should be for this type of having a third teacher. Don't panic. We won't have time to cover it tonight, but we are going to revisit enabling environments, which we did probably about over a year ago now, I think. So it's time to revisit that and what we mean by an enabling environment. Any of you that have been to any of our network sessions will probably understand what we mean about these sort of curious objects and things that just spark imagination in children and interest in children. And as I think it's Mel up here, sorry, I'm really difficult to scroll up and down on my thing. Being out on walks and in the garden is enough. That is exactly right. And also with babies, I'm going to be doing another webinar on Pickler. And I wrote a blog on Pickler, which also covers this type of thing about how everything is new to babies. They don't need us to do anything special for them because everything in the world is new. So everything is interesting to them, But yeah, just being outside, looking at the trees, picking up conkers, as someone was just saying, finding an interesting stone. Anyone who's ever gone for a walk with an 18-month-old, 2-year-old will know every single thing you see on the floor is really, really interesting, isn't it? And sometimes it's not something you want to pick up, but you might see a worm wiggling along. You might see a flower. You might pick up a really good leaf or a really nice stick. All of those things are led by the child. They don't need us to do that for them. You can't plan for that. So one problem I would suggest you do have with written plans or structured plans is that you, as Lisa was saying, you might write a plan about, let's say, for instance, we say this week we're going to learn all about fire engines. That's great for the one child that really likes fire engines. Not so great for the other children who aren't so interested in fire engines. But also, what if that fire engine child has gone off them, has learned everything they want to know and wants to move on to something else? Then you've put all that effort into planning, and then you go, oh, well, what was the point in that? Because they didn't want to learn it anyway. And I know at some point in the distant past, I'm sure Lisa was probably in childcare at that point as well, we used to have to plan retrospectively, watch what the child was doing and then write the plans backwards. That was just the craziest thing. I would urge you all to try and let go of that a little bit and just watch the children and have interesting things that the children can do and play with and investigate. And then you'll see, as Kate was saying, you'll see this amazing sort of learning and experimentation coming through. Sorry, what's Deb saying? I'm just going to quickly read the chat. Victoria, let's have a look. I let children explore and will extend learning as we go. Brilliant. My one big worry is Ofsted. Ofsted, don't worry about that because Kate's going to tell you all about it in a second. Ofsted do not want to see adult-led, and you can tell them you are not an adult-led setting. I didn't have an activity set up or anything during my Ofsted inspection, and neither did Kate, and we both got outstanding. So that tells you something, doesn't it?
And we did.
Sorry?
We had no paperwork or planning or anything.
No. They don't want to look at paperwork.
No.
They won't look at it. So don't even bother. Don't bother with it. I'm really sorry. I'm trying to read the chat as it's zooming up and down. I'd love a session or email website or posts on loose parts. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Have you? I can't see who that is. Victoria, no, Debs. I'm so sorry. I just cannot scroll up and down tonight on this thing. There are lots of information on loose parts on the enabling environment Padlet that I did, but come back for the enabling environment webinar and we'll go over it then. But if you just Google loose parts, there's loads and loads and loads of stuff that you can. Anything is.
I was just going to interrupt. Sorry, Kim. I was going to say, following up what Deb said, I've just made a note of that. I've just copied and pasted that into a document that I've got. So I think that's a really good idea. We could put something together because we have got a lot of documents and blogs and things. So
yeah,
Deb, if you email me, reply to the email that you got this link on, then I can send you a lot of good stuff that we've kind of built up. But also, as Kim said, make sure you go to her webinar
yeah, we'll do the next one. So let's our focus isn't usually on Ofsted because that's not really our remit, but just because we've got the question, hey, let's have a quick chat about Ofsted and you wrote a really good blog about your Ofsted inspections. So do you want to kick off and tell us what it is?
So as anyone would, as we all do, we have a wobble before inspection. And I've used this approach for such a long time now. But even I started thinking, do I need to plan something? Do I need to have it all written down? Do I need to do an activity? But then I thought no, because ultimately Ofsted wants to know what it's like to be a child in your setting in that moment. So I had to be true to myself. I had to be true to my kids. I didn't want to throw them a curveball, and I decided to let them lead the inspection. And actually, it couldn't have gone any better. I had some bits out like we normally would. I had clay out, I had herbs, I had tea bag, all of that stuff that I would normally have out. And I explained to my inspector beforehand. I explained to her on the phone when she called that I wouldn't be doing activity. I explained my pedagogy, and I explained, that there's no paperwork to go with it. And she was absolutely fine with that. And as it was, we had the most relaxed, brilliant morning where my children just potted around and we followed them about and we kind of sat on the sidelines until we were invited in, until they showed an interest in either asking us a question or needing help with something. But I know that there's kind of like, well, how did you prove, that the children were learning? Like, how did you prove their development through inspector? And it was just a case of, if I noticed they were doing something, I very quietly told my inspector, I said, this is this child, they know this, this, and this. This is what their next steps are. And right now I can see that they're doing this. I'll extend that next time by doing blah, blah, blah. And she was perfectly happy with that. She could see that they were learning. She could see that I was meeting all their developmental needs. She could see that they were working on the next steps. And what was really, really fabulous was that she wasn't just seeing what they were learning, but how they were learning. And that was, she said as she left, and this is off the record because it wasn't in my report, but she said, what I've seen here today, I wish I could tell everyone to come and see it because I can't put it into words. And she said, your report won't do you justice. Like, it looks so easy. How do you make it look so easy? And I just said, it is easy. If we relax and if we let that kind of go, that whole side of we've got to evidence everything, we've got to have it all in writing, we have got to cover all 7 areas, we've got to prove that they are learning that in that moment, but we're doing that anyway without realizing. We're not forcing it. Those children are already doing it. If we just watch and we notice, we point it out to our inspector that we're noticing it, that's enough. It is that easy.
Is
you
enough.
know, yeah, it
Thank you,
takes a
Ted. I totally
professional.
agree.
Yeah.
So, Sam's saying about so we shouldn't have any planned activities at all now. Well, if you read the EYFS, the the latest childminding EYFS from January, yeah, there is no requirement to do anything written like that at all. If you feel like you want to, you can, but I would ask what benefit is that to the children? So, as Kate was saying, that being able to watch the children using the resources in the environment in the way they wanted to um, gave her a lot more feedback about their development than having a written sheet, for example, that says that we must know what the shapes are this week or something like that. Because generally speaking, the EYFS is moving away from this idea of top-down, adult knows best, child knows nothing, to adult and child working together to support the child's development. If anyone's familiar with the Reggio Emilia approach, that's like that. You're working at the same level, you're scaffolding, you're supporting, you're enabling by providing resources and experiences, but the children are leading their own learning. And that's what the EYFS says. It says children learn best when they lead their own learning. I think a lot of that comes down to confidence in being able to explain why you do things a certain way, doesn't it, Kate? And why, how it works and why it's beneficial. I had a very similar experience to you in my inspection. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, you know, we all kind of think about, oh, you know, the inspector's going to come in and they're going to tell us what they want to see. But I think what's really important is that this is your inspection. You get to lead it. So lead it from the moment they walk through the door. You know, you show them what you want to say. You tell them everything you want to say. Yeah. Don't wait to be asked. You know, you are leading that and they're just observing. And the other thing I was going to say was an example of like, say like you were concerned about like, am I bringing maths into it, you know, on a high enough level, you know, you think, oh, I'll plan an activity that, you know, we've got number cards and we've got this and this, we're proving we can physically see that maths is involved. But for me on inspection day, children with the clay, they were dividing it up. We were talking about weight, we were talking about volume, you know, we were measuring things, you know, that's the maths, you know, that's an example of like holistically, you're already probably doing all things, you know, the language that you're using, you know, we're already doing it. We don't have to force, you know, the evidence. You're doing it for the children. You're not doing it for Ofsted. So it's reframing it, isn't it? And feeling confident that what you're doing is enough, I think.
I completely agree. One thing I've always felt, and I have said to inspectors before, is that it's not up to the child to prove to me they can do anything. It's up to me to see that in the child. And I can curate the environment to make that work, can't I? So I can make sure there are lots of mathematical resources in the environment, like scales and calculators and pretend phones and calendars and all that type of thing. I can curate the environment to make sure there's lots of text in the environment so that they start to recognize text, and there's lots of mark making material, so they're doing mark making. But this all comes down, I think, to having really, really intimate knowledge of your children in your setting and their development. Exactly, you know exactly what they like, don't you? I bet if I was to come to any of your settings and point at a particular child and say, tell me about this child, you'd be able to say, oh, he absolutely loves animals and he's always pretending to be a cat and he really likes squeezing in and out of small spaces. You could tell me all those things, couldn't you? And that's what Ofsted want to hear. They want to hear those things. And then they'll say, okay, so where is he in his development and how are you supporting that development to move on in tiny little increments rather than the great big leaps in development that we used to have in the past. So that leads us on quite nicely, I think, Kate, to what we were saying about if someone isn't using in the moment planning or learning, I prefer learning actually, how can we sort of say, give it a go? What can we do? Any hints and tips?
I mean, it feels for somebody that plans a lot. So say like you've got provision where you've got a theme every week, or everything you're doing is planned. You're setting up these beautiful activities beforehand before the children come in. All of this kind of stuff. It can seem really daunting to let that go, and also to kind of get over that feeling that what you're doing when you're planning in the moment is enough. And I would say that if that feels too daunting, just do it gradually, you know, like maybe say, right, one morning this week, I'm going to make sure my whole environment has enough for the children, but I'm not gonna plan anything. I'm not gonna like, direct their focus to anything. I'm literally just gonna sit back and watch and see what happens. And I think the more that you do that, the more confident you become when you start noticing that the little things are the big things, you know, and you're not having to prove who are you proving it to? Do you know what I mean? Who are we doing this for? Once you realise that actually the children don't need that, then your confidence builds, and I think that you can roll it out more and more and more. I mean, I found that I don't know if you've done this in the past, Kim, but I was doing activities or doing things and then going back and writing it down as if I planned it, as if to prove to myself that I'd done enough. And I was wasting all of that time on my admin when I realized actually who is this for? It's not actually helping me, it's not helping the children, it's just evidencing that, we've done stuff this week, or so I think it's just finding that confidence.
It is definitely Sam's just put, and Sam, please don't worry about your inspection next week, please don't, and please don't suddenly change something, because as Kate said, that will throw everyone off for the inspection.
Be your authentic self. An inspector will know if you change something or you're not doing something you've not done. Your children will unfortunately let that cat out of the bag. So just be weird.
But so you've said I tend to get the kids to pick a topic, and we plan to. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to pick on your comment here, and then we plan together activities we can do with this. For example, the kids wanted to make a bug hotel, so we all went to the forest yesterday, collected materials, and then went and collected old boxes from the supermarket, etc. That sounds absolutely amazing, and that would be a good thing to talk to Ofsted about. But I would say, from my point of view, you don't need to pick a topic, because things ebb and flow, don't they? Like I was saying about the children in my setting on Friday, they were at the ice cream shop, and then they were building a den, and then they went and did some painting, and then they were mixing up stuff in the mud kitchen, and then they were digging holes in the mud pit. And that isn't a topic. I couldn't put all that together and say this was a topic about things you could do in the garden, for example. Let it ebb, let it flow, let the children lead the way, as Lisa was saying. Let things, and it doesn't have to be big and fancy. It doesn't have to be something that lasts the whole week. It might be that a child has a fleeting interest in something they've seen for a minute, and you think, I'm going to support them with that, and then they move on to something else, or they might it might be something where they're really interested in something for a long time. Some children are, aren't they? That's great. Go with it, but I wouldn't try and pin it down to your example of the bug hotel is lovely. Imagine if that's on the Monday, and then by Friday the kids are thinking, I'm just so fed up, I don't want to play with bugs anymore. I'm really interested in just digging. I just want to go and dig. It doesn't have to be something that an adult has said, this is what we're going to do, and this is what's going to last all week long, because that loses the spark that children get when they're in early years, because of that holistic learning, as Kate's saying. I don't want to keep advertising our webinars, but there is a webinar on holistic learning as well, if anyone wants to go back and watch that. And that's because children in the early years, as I'm sure we all know, don't learn in separate categories. So they don't learn writing and then learn maths and then learn physical skills and then learn PSED. It is all encompassed in one thing. My suggestion would be, definitely, if you want to, two suggestions. If you're interested in this type of approach, try and come to one of the network sessions if you can, because they're all about loose parts, and you will be amazed at the intense, really deep learning that comes from boxes, tape, sticks, pieces of clay, feathers, stones, shells. You will be amazed by it. And you'll be amazed by your children and the intensity of their learning. And also, just try sitting back, make yourself a cup of tea, sit down somewhere and watch the children when they're deeply engaged, especially if they're in a group together. And like I said before, just write down what they're doing, make an observation. I wouldn't normally suggest you do written observations, but just for this, and then work out, hang on, what was the learning there? There will be tons of learning. Like Kate was saying, they're filling up something, so it's heavy, it's half full, it's empty. It's there, you need to pay for the ice cream, so here are 3 shells. The shells are the money for the ice creams. It's communication, it's negotiation, it's physical skills, it's maths, it's all of those areas, all in one go, without you having to plan anything, because children can do it all by themselves with us just enabling it. That's what we really mean by this sort of in the moment learning, just being there to support that learning rather than
actually,
Kim,
sorry, something you just sparked something that I did want to say. It goes back to that Magda Gerber quote, in that just be really mindful as well that you're not stepping in all the time and thinking, oh, I need to point out that this child is doing, I need to verbally say that they're doing, because that child will know that they're learning at that moment. If you cut in at a point where they're super engaged, you run the risk of breaking that concentration, and then the moment's gone. So I always say that I try and step back before I step in, because we have to ask ourselves, like, in that moment, does that child really need us to add something? So it's about kind of becoming comfortable in knowing actually that child right now is learning enough without me butting in, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then there are other times where actually it would be valuable for you to add something to it, and you're not going to break that child's concentration. So
I agree. We've quite often in other webinars, Kate said, be like a vampire, only go in when you're invited.
Exactly, yeah.
And that,
I love that.
A child might literally ask you for help with something, or they might just look at you, or they might offer you something, and that communication could be all sorts of things. Sorry, the question about events and festivals, that is completely up to you. If you want to plan for things like that, or you want to celebrate things like that, go ahead, because it's your setting. It's not up to Kate and Lisa and I what you do. This is just we explaining how we do things. But personally, I don't do that. I prefer the Steiner Waldorf approach, which is the celebrate cycle of the year. So we've got a lot of spring flowers and things in the setting at the moment. But we won't all be, for example, sitting down making painted Easter eggs, because that's just not the sort of thing that we do. That's too adult-led for me, and we're a child-led. And Helen say they plan for festival. That's if it's relevant to the children in your setting. I know Lisa and I have spoken about this so many times. If it's relevant to the children in your setting, then go for it. But I would say this comes down to cultural capital for a lot of people, doesn't it? And cultural capital doesn't really mean celebrating festivals that have no relevance to you. So if you've got children in your setting, I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a festival.
I think the best one's Chinese New Year.
Yeah, Lunar New Year. Yeah, that's maybe not relevant to the children in your setting, but what is relevant to the children in your setting is being able to walk around their immediate environment and know where the shop is and where the pond is, and walking past someone's house where the black cat lives. That's what we're talking about when I didn't mean cultural capital, sorry, I meant understanding the world. That's what we mean by understanding the world in very, very young children. When children get a little bit older and they're at school and they start to break away that holistic play where they're learning English and then history and that type of thing, then they've got the capacity to understand that a little bit more. I know some of the childminders, I'm in Colchester, some of the childminders here went to the university for Lunar New Year, where the Chinese association or group had a dragon dance going on. If you want to go along to something like that, that's great, because that's quite an interesting thing for everyone to see. But it's a bit like me saying to you, hey, you're going to celebrate a festival that you don't know anything about, and it's not anything to do with your own culture, but it's to do with someone else's culture. And that doesn't mean we're ignoring other people's cultures at all, because that should be embedded. Diversity should be embedded within our settings anyway, through the way we talk to people, the way we model what we say about people, things like books that we have in our setting, and and that type of thing. It's not necessarily about just celebrating different festivals, but that's their own setting. You have to make your own decision on that. Sorry, Lisa. Did you say something?
It's the way that I think when we look at how children learn, especially, I mean, if we take the barn, for instance, we aren't very diverse. We are very white, probably white, middle class-ish setting. We don't have anyone of any other faith other than Christian or not, and that's it. And so if we then say, right, today we're all celebrating Eid, first of all, we know that children learn and build on the experiences that they've already got. So if they haven't got any experiences of Eid, then you need to make that a teachable moment. So therefore you have to explicitly teach them something about Eid. And then if you then don't do anything with that explicit teaching, so you then don't say, right, now we're all going to go to a mosque and continue that, that explicit teaching's been lost. So it's almost, you have to look at what it is you want the children to learn. And and like Kim said, what's relevant for them, and then make sure that what we're not doing is becoming, my fear is that we become tokenistic. So we then recognise these faiths at points of their celebration, but actually we don't really learn anything about those faiths. We haven't learned how to be tolerant and all of those things. We need to do that with the people that we're with every day and build that tolerance, respect and understanding of everybody's individuality as human beings before we then start putting in that tokenistic learning. That's my personal view.
I think, Lisa, as well, like, we've got to be so careful that we're not appropriating other people's, but they're not ours to celebrate. They're not, if we don't have a child that's celebrating in the setting, they are not for us to celebrate. I have a little girl who is Chinese and she does celebrate Chinese New Year. So she brought the learning in with her. She brought in mooncakes, she brought in her dragon from home, she brought her, and that was it. She led that. She stood up and she basically taught my children about her festival that meant so much to her. But had she not been, we wouldn't have done it. So,
and that's very meaningful to her, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we're gonna run over again tonight. Is that all right, Damon?
He's gonna sleep. All right.
No, I'm still here.
Okay. Yeah. So Barbara said, I sometimes find it hard if they have an interest. I may not have any other resources to support it. I look on the internet for ideas, but in the moment it's gone. So this is where having an enabling environment would work, Barbara, because is this Barbara? Are you Barbara from Rowhedge? If you are, you've been to my setting, haven't you? So my resources don't really change. I might occasionally add things to it, like some interesting packaging, for example, or someone gave me some handbags this week, that type of thing. I don't have closed resources really, like that can only be one thing. So if a child's got an interest in construction, there's tons of things they can construct with. They don't need to have a particular resource that suits that. If a child's got an interest in nature, they can go outside in the garden, or we can go to the park, or we can go to the woods. They can take a magnifying glass with them. I don't need to go and buy some plastic insects, for example, that type of thing. So I would definitely say don't feel you've got to buy new stuff, but go with this. Look at your resources. When we do the enabling environment, these sort of things go hand in hand, don't they? When we do that, we'll look at our resources. I'll do some pictures of some of my resources as well, and maybe Kate can send some in, and Lisa as well, and then we'll just show you that what you've got to look for in your setting is not expensive, but is learning rich resources. So it's got a lot of what we call affordance. You can use it for anything. So something like a box is a really good example. A child that's got a box, that box might be a boat, it could be a hat, it could be something to transport all the teddy bears in. It could be they could put it on their back and be a tortoise. They could paint it. They could stab it with a pen. They could do anything with it. It's just one object and it doesn't have a purpose, as Lisa was saying about her resources earlier. So that's the key. The key to all of this is not having lots of expensive, fancy resources, but just being able to go with the flow a little bit. So if you've got a child that really likes, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, really likes mixing colours, let's say mixing colours, that's great. Mix some colours, do some painting with, just make sure there's enough paint there for them, make sure there's things to paint on, make sure they can do small painting and big painting. Just give your resources, have that availability. If you've got a child that likes stabbing things with the pen, give them cardboard boxes, give them pieces of clay that they can stab, give them Play-Doh. Or if you haven't got clay and you haven't got Play-Doh, make sure there's some mud that they can stab. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
I've got a really great example of this actually, Kim.
Stabbing things.
No, not children stabbing things. My little group at the moment are obsessed with Moana. And something really interesting happened this week. So on Friday, so I've got 3 and 4 year olds at the moment. On Friday, my dressing up box is like, we don't have costumes. They are intelligent, outfits that they can put together. We've got actual hats and this and that bits of fabric. They had such a great day on Friday from my loose parts and from the dressing up and all of these things to recreate Moana, and they role played that all day long. And then those children came back yesterday, and one of the little girls had been bought the Moana costume and the replica necklace and Maui's hook, and play just wasn't as rich, and it kind of died after about half an hour. And the 2 boys that I had, were really upset that they didn't have like the heart of Tafiti, as they call it, from the film. So we went out to the garden, we found stones, we painted our own ones, and that was more valuable to those children than the plastic replica. But it was really interesting to see that the joy that they were getting out of it on Friday wasn't just that they were playing Moana, it was how they were creating that. It was what they were finding to use from the playroom, and that didn't happen yesterday when they did have the actual replica.
I was going to literally say the same thing, Katie.
Sorry.
It was talking. I was going to say, you've got all of these boys that are superheroes, that are really interested in superheroes. Don't put the superhero costumes in. No. Just put fabric, coloured fabric.
Kills it in a second.
And absolutely. And it's
one of my little ones.
Creativity to it at all.
Yeah.
I have those. I don't know if you've seen those round pegs that I have that are for sun loungers, but they're very good for making dents and things. One of my little ones wears those on his wrists, and that gives him superpowers.
Amazing.
And that's that's not an expensive resource. It's a resource I've got anyway. I'm just trying to read through some of these messages. So I think the confusion lies with planning and setting up resources. I have loose parts out, plus I will set up the light bulb with a variety of objects and let the children explore and play. That sounds absolutely fine. I hope we're not making it confusing. If you think about the different areas of learning on a very basic level, just make sure that there's something available that covers every area of learning. So you've got some notepads and some pens out. You've got some books out. You've got some something to do with maths somewhere along the line. It might be you've got some clocks, or you've got some scales and things like that. You've got something that's malleable, so Play-Doh, clay, gloop, mud, anything like that, sand. Make sure you've got some type of physical play available to the children. It doesn't have to be expensive or fancy. It can be a pile of cushions. They can put them on the floor. They can choose to do that. Or like these pegs I was just describing, have some pegs they can use. They're making dens, but they're also using their fine motor skills. If you look at your very basic setup, would be what we used to call our continuous provision, and I guess we probably still would. Something that covers every area of the development areas in your setting, available all the time to all the children. And doesn't have to be loads of things, doesn't have to be like everything out at the same time, but that way you start to see this sort of enabling environment. Let's have a look. Shannon said about the vampire quote. I'm sure you've heard me say that before, Shannon. I'm pretty sure you have heard me say that. I have a question from Jade regarding the environment. We are doing in the moment planning. We have focused children each week, and each day we set up activities, garden craft, tactile, based on their interests, etc. You mentioned about scaling everything back and less planning and less adult led? Is this something we should be doing? I think it sounds like you're doing really well, Jade. It sounds lovely. Like we were just saying, you children have got resources available to them, especially open-ended resources. They'll use them for whatever they need to use them for, won't they? They'll use that box for whatever they need to use it for. They'll use that tube for whatever they need to use it for. They'll go and look for some tape to join them together. They don't need an adult to be constantly doing those things for them, because you're sort of limiting what they can do in the moment. You're just there to sort of support that. Would you say, Kate? Would you say?
Yeah, I would say as well, I've written down here, try and change your mindset to having a yes mindset. So, if a child comes up and says, oh, can we add this to this, and say like it's something really messy, maybe normally you'd be like, oh, I can't be bothered with the cleanup or whatever. Just try and say yes more often and see where that takes your children, because we often we might think, oh, actually, no, we can do that tomorrow when, we've got more time, or, we'll do it outside, that kind of thing. I think we've just got to be a little bit more accommodating of saying yes to things, that to the ideas that children have, and to letting them mix stuff up or getting stuff messy, or, just seeing where it takes them.
That's an incredibly good point.
Yeah, but I think the other thing as well is like when people say, oh, I don't know whether it's all set up at the same time, but you might think, oh, we'll do craft at like 3 o'clock, or, so you're doing all the things, but try and have it out already, all of that out. Your provision is all laid out for the day. There's not a set time for doing craft. The craft can be accessed, whenever. They might go backwards and forwards to it. They might not stick at it for long, but they might revisit it, or they might link something that they've done in the morning and go back to think, oh, actually I could use this with this, or it's about just giving them the freedom. I think that's what it is, isn't it? The freedom to explore and create and just be in that, in that environment, and seeing where it takes them.
Yeah, in that creative environment. Yeah, you're quite right, because I think very young children, their brains are so dynamic and are operating at such a sort of high speed that they do need to flip from one thing to another sometimes, don't they? And you're right, they might do something and then they might go off, and then they might come back and add some more to it, and then they might go off and they might come back the next day and add to it, so I think you're right. That's what I do. I have a sort of coffee table. It's like general craft type stuff.
That's what we've got as well.
Yeah, and that's just always there. And I might occasionally put something underneath. I've got baskets with packaging and stuff, so occasionally I add something new to that, or I might buy some different type of tape and I put that there. And yes, there are scissors out. Someone said to me before about, aren't you worried about scissors? No, I've never had an incident with scissors, but you know your own children best. So, but I want them to be able to just get the scissors and use them, and then I'll support them if they need it, rather than them having to ask me first and me assuming that they can't use scissors. Oh, thank